It was dawn at St. Helena Hospital, an old building built in 1924, where the nighttime silence seemed denser than the air itself. The walls, covered in layers of peeling paint, seemed to absorb sound, leaving only the distant echo of Nurse Amanda's footsteps as she walked down the narrow third-floor corridor. The low hum of fluorescent lights mingled with the occasional creak of aging pipes. Amanda held a clipboard against her chest, jotting down routine readings, when something at the edge of her vision moved too quickly to explain. A shadow glided across the wall as if something disembodied had passed through the air in a continuous motion. Instinct made her turn her head, but she found only the cold, smooth wall bathed in pale, intermittent light. No sound, no physical presence, just that immediate suffocating feeling that she was being watched. Her heart raced, and the air felt heavier, almost thick. She knew she was alone, but she was certain she had seen somebody move. Determined not to let her imagination get the better of her, Amanda walked to the spot where she'd seen the shadow disappear. She ran her hand along the wall, feeling the cold surface, but something made her stop. There was a strangely colder area, as if she were touching solid ice. She took a step back, her gaze fixed on that spot, when the light above her blinked 3 times. In the brief moment of darkness, something reflected in the window pane of room 308's door. It wasn't her reflection. It was an elongated, faceless silhouette moving behind her, but when she turned, the hallway was empty. The silence was broken by a dull sound, the metallic click of a door closing by itself at the end of the hall. The sign, illuminated by the flickering light, read, "Insulation." Amanda knew with absolute certainty that the room had been officially deactivated for over 10 years. St. Helena Hospital has always had something unsettling about it. Located in the upper part of the city, surrounded by mature trees and narrow streets, its time-darkened brick facade seemed more suited to a turn-of-the-century sanatorium than a modern medical center. Built in 1924, it had survived renovations, partial fires, and decades of stories that spread among residents like urban legends. The third floor, where Amanda worked, was in the east wing, near the old and partially decommissioned areas. Some rooms, especially 308, were never reopened after incidents no one could fully explain. Amanda was new to the night shift. Her veteran colleagues, upon noticing her night shift, cast quick glances as if they knew something she didn't yet. "If you hear anything in the isolation corridor, don't stop," one of them said, half laughing, half serious. She laughed along, thinking it was just a joke to scare the newbies. That night, the temperature seemed cooler than usual, even with the heating system on. The metallic smell of disinfectant mingled with a slightly damp odor, as if water had seeped into the walls. The lamps flickered occasionally, casting shadows that lengthened and distorted across the surfaces. Amanda had always been skeptical. She believed everything had a logical explanation. But as she progressed through her rounds, she began to feel a strange pressure on the back of her neck, as if something were behind her, tracking her steps, even though the hallway remained empty. The moment came without warning. As she was recording a patient's vital signs and leaving the room, something passed in her peripheral vision. It wasn't just any reflection. The shadow had shape, contours, and a deliberate movement, as if it knew where it was going. It shot quickly across the wall and disappeared around the corner that led to the isolation ward. Amanda froze, her pen suspended in mid-air. Her ears became more sensitive, picking up the slightest sound. The buzzing of the lights seemed louder, the air colder. "Anyone there?" she called, but her voice was small, muffled by the walls. "No. Answer." She decided to move forward, trying to convince herself it might be another employee. Each step made the floor creak slightly. When she reached the spot where she'd seen the shadow bend, there was no one. The hallway was deserted, illuminated by a yellowish light that flickered irregularly. A strange chill ran down her spine. It wasn't fear, yet, but a feeling that something had shifted right there, in the same space she'd occupied seconds before. Suddenly, a loud crack came from the ceiling. Amanda looked up, but only saw the light bulb sway slightly, as if someone had walked underneath and created a draft. No wind, no movement, just that silence that, at St. Helena, seemed to have a life of its own. It was at that moment that she heard the metallic sound of a door closing. The source was clear, the end of the isolation corridor. Amanda followed it with slow steps until she stopped in front of the door to 308. The number was crooked, partially faded. The paint on the door was peeling in flakes, revealing the dark wood beneath. There was a small, milky glass window in the center, covered in dust and old stains. She knew the room was officially vacant, but she couldn't ignore the urge to turn the doorknob. The smell that escaped was of mildew and something deeper, as if the air inside hadn't been refreshed in decades. The room was dim, with a metal bed pushed against the wall, its mattress thin and stained. The ceiling showed cracks, and a faded curtain covered the window. Amanda took a step inside, and the floor creaked under her weight. It was then that he heard a subtle sound, like fabric dragging on the floor, coming from the corner. His heart raced. He looked, but saw nothing but the shadow cast by the curtain. Still, he had the strange sensation that the shadow had shifted position when he looked away. But before continuing the story, check if you are already subscribed to the channel, because there is a new video here every day. Back at the nurse's station, Amanda noticed a folder on the floor. She didn't remember dropping it. The cover was covered in fine dust, but the name written on a yellowed label was legible: Daniel Price, 1987. Upon opening it, he found meticulous medical notes. Daniel had been hospitalized for episodes of agitation and allegations of figures moving across the wall at night. Doctors noted bruises on his body, appearing without apparent cause. On the following pages, incoherent sentences. They stare from the wall. They don't blink. When I turn off the light, they get closer. On the last page, a note abruptly broke off, stained with something dark. Amanda couldn't decide if it was mold, rust, or dried blood. She felt a shiver run down her spine. As she closed the folder, she heard another crack coming from the isolation corridor, and this time, the sound was followed by a soft whisper. Amanda decided she needed to see what the cameras had captured. The third-floor security station was a narrow room, with 2 old monitors stacked on a metal table, a digital recorder, and a lingering smell of heated dust. The nurse inserted the key into the side panel and turned on the playback system. The images began to scroll by in black and white. Empty hallways, half-closed doors, shadows that belonged to simple objects. The medication cart, the IV pole, her own body as she entered and left rooms. She fast-forwarded the timeline to the exact time she saw the shadow in the hallway. The digital indicator read 2:13. On the first play, nothing. On the second, a slight tremor ran across the screen, like an inverted heat wave. Amanda paused, rewinding frame by frame. The image burst into static noise for milliseconds, then returned, as if something passed between the camera and the hallway. She squinted, bringing her face closer to the monitor. In the frozen frame, barely perceptible, an elongated deformation crossed the wall, not projected onto it but fused with it, sliding from one side to the other like a liquid shadow. The nurse felt the back of her neck go cold. She played it again, this time at normal speed. The glitch reappeared briefly, and a sharp crack sounded from the ceiling of the security station, making her flinch reflexively. Suddenly, the left monitor went black. The right one remained, but with horizontal stripes running across the image. Amanda checked cables, connections, buttons. Nothing was wrong. The overhead lights flickered in sequence, as if something was intermittently consuming power. She took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. She paused the footage at the most distorted split second and, on an impulsive decision, used the camera's digital zoom. Poor, grainy, but sufficient for an outline. The enlargement revealed what appeared to be the profile of a detailless head, pressed against the wall, turned toward the camera. There were no eyes, no mouth, just the rounded suggestion of a skull and a stretch at what would be a shoulder, as if the body were stretched further than anatomy would allow. The station's lights flickered again. The monitor reactivated on its own, displaying an archived image from earlier that night, without warning. For a moment, the system seemed to decide what to show, jumping between time slots, as if someone were rewinding and fast-forwarding the tape without touching anything. Amanda pressed the panic button to summon the night guard, but the panel responded with a dull beep. No lights came on. A cold current ran through her ankle. The nurse instinctively looked down and felt the floor vibrate slightly, not like a tremor, but as if something were moving beneath the vinyl, scratching inside, slowly circling the table. The monitor froze, and in the freeze, something shifted. Amanda recognized herself, standing in a stretch of empty hallway, a scene from just minutes ago. But now there was a second shape plastered to the wall, a negative of presence to her right. She remembered nothing there. Her hand trembled as she scrolled through the video for 3 more frames. The shape peeled away from the wall and stretched out, as if inhaling its own shadow, and for an impossible second tilted its face toward the lens. The monitor hissed loudly, a high-pitched frequency cut through the air, and the screen went black. In the silence, the hospital seemed to hold its breath along with her. Amanda stepped back from the table, feeling as if something was waiting patiently in the hallway outside, for the right moment to show itself again. She went down to the maintenance room, where she usually found the hospital's oldest janitor, Mr. Coleman, a thin man with a thin beard and hands that always smelled of oil and rust from the pipes. The clock read 2:47 when Amanda entered and found him sitting on a stool, reading an old newspaper folded in 4. He looked up wearily, and before she could speak, he seemed to know what the early morning had brought her to. "It's on the 3rd floor, isn't it?" he said, his voice rough as sandpaper. "The things that walk on the wall." Amanda hesitated, torn between admitting what she'd seen and maintaining her rational shell. "The cameras are interfering. I saw something coming through the wall. And the 308, that door shouldn't move on its own." Coleman slowly put down the newspaper. "Since 1987, we've been pretending not to see. There was a patient, Daniel Price. He said the shadow came when the lights flickered and that she heard his name. When no one was around, they made fun of him until they stopped." The janitor opened a drawer and took out an old, rusty set of keys and a faded identification card. "I was working here when things got bad. One night, the cameras showed the hallway clean, but when the security guard walked by, he felt like he'd brushed against someone, only there was no one. The air turned cold, and the walls sweated water as if it were breathing. The next day, Daniel was found with long marks on his arms, like yours, but deeper. He swore that when he closed his eyes, he could see them moving inside his eyelid, like when you look at the sun and a spot appears. Only the spot changed location." Amanda described the glitch, the elongated silhouette, the eyeless face. Coleman nodded, pale, and added, "It's not a person, but it's not just a shadow either. Learn, repeat. If you run, it runs. If you look, it hides. If you ignore it, it comes closer." He took a deep breath, staring into the void. "There are places in the building where silence isn't silence. It's listening." The nurse asked for names, records, anything that might anchor the story. The janitor stood, walked to a metal cabinet, and pulled out a cardboard box tied with string. Inside were newspaper clippings about unexplained blackouts, internal forms for incidents never filed, yellowed Polaroids of empty hallways, with smudges from staff scrawling in pen. "Here, look at this. Looks like a shoulder." One of the photos bore the date, June 3rd, 1987. In the corner, the sign for room 308. The window appeared dark, the curtain motionless, and yet there seemed to be a kind of crease in the glass, like the outline of someone standing inside. Coleman carefully put everything back in the box, as if disturbing it might summon what they preferred to keep forgotten. "If you go there, never go alone, and if you hear your name, don't answer." Amanda nodded, but her decision was already made. Something between fear and necessity pulled her back to the third floor, as if the answer to the question she couldn't formulate were etched into the plaster walls. As she left, the janitor called out hesitantly, "If the light blinks 3 times, step away from the wall." "Why?" "Because that's how she lets you know she's going to pass." Have you ever witnessed a supernatural event? Tell us your story in the comments. The isolation corridor seemed larger when Amanda returned. The signage flickered in the tired light, and the sound of the air conditioning had become a ragged puff, reminiscent of asthmatic breathing. She walked slowly, guided by her instinct not to provoke. Her wristwatch read 3:09 when the first light blinked once, then again, and then a third, following the pattern the caretaker had described. Amanda stopped, not by rational choice, but because her body simply refused to take another step. The wall, to her right, painted an antique beige that had seen better days, seemed to acquire depth. It wasn't an optical illusion. It was as if the paint had become viscous, drawing the light inward into a slight hollow. From the depths of this hollow, something emerged soundlessly, first an elongation, like the shadow of an arm, then the outline of a shoulder that was too high, and then the profile of a smooth head where the face should have been. The shape didn't leave the wall. It stuck to it, sliding over the surface like spilled oil. Amanda took 2 steps back, but the shape's movement followed her. Retreat, like a tide that senses flight. The air cooled abruptly, and she saw her own breath in thin clouds of vapor. The overhead light bulb crackled and exploded with a flash, scattering tiny specks of glass that tinkled on the floor. Half the hallway plunged into darkness. The shape then seemed to stretch its neck, tilting its non-face in silent curiosity, and in an impossible gesture, crossed the corner and reappeared on the opposite wall, as if the geometry of the space were merely a suggestion to be ignored. The nurse tried to speak, but her voice faltered. The sound that came out was a hoarse, wordless whisper. The shape advanced. It didn't walk. It glided, with a trail of slightly denser darkness that temporarily erased the lines of the grout between the plasterboards. As she turned to flee, something closed the door at the end of the hallway, with the same metallic click as the other night. The sound reverberated in the void, and brought with it a damp, old smell, like overstored clothing. Amanda felt the urge to lean against the wall to steady herself, but remembered Coleman's warning and jerked her hand away in a panicked reflex. The shape stopped a few steps away, glued to the surface, leaning toward her. The next light blinked 3 times. Amanda ran. The sound of her rubber sneakers against the floor echoed loudly, syncopated, and something followed, not behind but alongside, running inside the wall. Each heartbeat seemed to set off sparks in the corners of her eyes. As she passed the 308, the door, which had previously been ajar, opened a few inches, enough for the darkness inside to call her name, or at least that's what she thought she heard. A scraping of syllables that resembled her voice spoken backward. She didn't want to look, but she did. And in the dusty little window, she saw the faint glow of something reflecting. Not her image, but rather her absence, as if the shadow were taking the place the reflection should have. The nurse felt her stomach sink. Without thinking, she pushed the door open. The 308 greeted her with a blast of cold air that smelled of metal and stagnant water. The light from the hallway spilled over the first steps into the room and died, swallowed by a thick gloom. Amanda groped the wall for the light switch, but it wasn't where it used to be, or her hand couldn't find it because the wall felt different, slightly rippled, like heavy fabric stretched over something breathing beneath. When her fingers finally touched the plastic, it flickered. The pendant light in the center of the ceiling didn't illuminate, it just flickered, flickering, and remaining in a sickly glow, enough to cast long, deep shadows. The metal bed, pushed to the right, had its mattress sunk in the center, as if someone had just sat down and stood up moments before. The faded curtain covered half the window, but what lay beyond it wasn't the street. It was a dense darkness, devoid of the grey that usually announces the outdoors. Amanda took 2 steps, and the chair beside the bed scraped the floor of its own accord, moving a few inches, as if offering a seat. She recoiled, tripping over the foot of the bed, and banged her hip, the sharp pain bringing a touch of reality to the impossible scene. In the opposite corner, near the wall where the paint had swollen, a low movement caught her eye. It wasn't the tall, elongated shape of the hallway. It was a gathering shadow on the baseboard, smoothing itself out and withdrawing like an animal. When she focused, the shadow seemed to understand it had been noticed and climbed the wall in a slow curve, drawing a dark spiral that settled near the ceiling, above the door. The air grew so cold that an indescribable mist formed in front of Amanda's mouth. The nurse tried to retreat toward the exit, but the door closed behind her with a muffled thud. Amanda ran, turned the handle, free, but the door wouldn't open more than a crack. There was something on the other side, elastic and invisible, offering resistance. She pushed with her shoulder to no avail. Then he heard it, the scraping of fabric on the floor, the same sound signature from the other night, now coming from every corner at once, as if the entire room were moving inside. The lamp flickered once, twice, 3 times. On the wall beside the bed, the tall shadow stretched, descending to the bed rails, touching them with a contact that wasn't contact, and when the lamp stabilized, the rails vibrated at a very fine frequency, almost music. The nurse kept her eyes on the floor and finally spoke softly, as if she could negotiate. "I didn't come to hurt you." The sentence died in the air. The shadow stopped moving, leaned forward again, and the mattress sank weightlessly, like a watermark growing in the fabric. The sheet formed a clear valley of a non-existent body. Amanda felt her legs give way and leaned her back against the door. Something brushed the back of her neck on the other side of the wood, cold as forgotten metal in the shadow. She stifled a sob. From above, in the spiral of darkness near the ceiling, a black drop detached itself and fell, not to the floor, but to the middle of the room, where it disappeared before touching the surface, as if the air had a denser point that swallowed matter. The chair moved further, scraping in an arc, and the curtain made a slight gesture, a windless greeting. The room wasn't a space. It was an organism waiting for her reaction. When the lamp gave its 4th flash, the shadow cast, for the first time, the outline of a hand, too long with slender fingers, which slowly opened toward Amanda's face, stopping just a few centimeters away, as if measuring the distance between a question and an answer. Then the lights went out. The first sensation was sound, not the sound of the hospital, but a whisper of dry hail against the non-existent glass. Amanda raised her hand, finding only cold air. The black had a density. She called, "Out, is anyone here?" And her own voice returned with a delay, drifting through the room as if passing through a heavy curtain before returning. There was another voice there, however, low, masculine, toneless. It wasn't a sound you heard. It was a sound you sensed, like the vibration of a motor in another room. The voice spoke her name. It didn't shout it. It didn't ask for it. It enunciated, as if checking someone off a list. Amanda. She placed her palm blindly against the wall and immediately withdrew. The surface pulsed in icy cycles like a heartbeat out of rhythm. The voice repeated her name and then formed a sentence she didn't quite catch. Only the end was clear, cut from the rest by an uncomfortable certainty. I'm still here. The nurse tried to pinpoint where it was coming from. To the left, at floor level, to the right, high above her head. Sometimes it seemed to come from within the sunken mattress, other times from the thick shadow in the corner. And when the whisper landed right behind her ear, so close it vibrated her eardrum, she understood there was no single point. The whole room was speaking. A cinder of panic rose from her stomach. Amanda, however, did what she had learned from years of duty: breathe, count, organize her fear into drawers. "Who are you?" she asked, unyielding her vertigo. The answer wasn't a name. It was a noise like scraping letters, as if someone were pushing a word too large through a narrow passage. Between the cracks, she fished for syllables that could form Dan-L, and suddenly Daniel Price's face came to her, concocted from nothing, a figure from a file, a man too young to die, awakened night after night by something he saw when the lights flickered. "Are you Daniel?" she ventured, and the darkness seemed to recede a little, as if taking a deep breath. At the same moment, something gently touched her shoulder. Not pressure, not heat, just the sensation that the space her body occupied was now shared by another density. The voice whispered closer, "Here." A hand, as cold as shadow, passed over the skin of her arm without touching, and cold marks sprouted, long lines that burned inside like snow. Amanda sucked in a sharp breath, and instinct screamed to run, but the door behind her remained rigid, the crack minimal, the resistance elastic. The lamp tried to relight. A wisp of light leaked from the bulb and died. In the interval, the mattress shifted, as if someone were shifting position. The voice, now in two distinct spots, repeated, "Here, here." It wasn't a threat. It was an affirmation. It was permanence. Amanda squinted into the already dark darkness and said, with all the courage a trembling body allows, "I see you." As she said it, she realized she couldn't see. She perceived, and that was worse, because in recognizing she gave form, and in giving form she gave path. On the other side of the door, far away, a hospital alarm rang twice and stopped, as if suffocated. On the ceiling, something ran in 4 directions at once and met in the center. The wall behind her softened for a second, and the door gave way, enough for hope to sink its fingernail in. Amanda gathered her strength, turned the handle, leaned her shoulder, and in the final stretch between giving up and collapsing, the lamp came on. The light didn't chase away the shadow. It merely revealed it more clearly. An outline too human, too tall, too thin, nailed to the wall like a fresco without. A saint, tilting its non-face to her height, the distance of an unspoken word. "I'm still here," she repeated, and for the first time, the phrase didn't sound inside Amanda's head, but in the air, where words leave invisible ripples that the ear recognizes. It was then that she understood she had crossed the silent boundary between imagining and encountering, and that whatever the next step would be, it would be taken within presence. Amanda didn't remember opening the door, only running down the hallway, her heart hammering in her chest and her feet pounding against the polished floor. The lights flickered on and off behind her, as if something were purposely turning off the light to shorten the distance. The hallway seemed longer, as if stretching with each step, but adrenaline kept her legs working. The chill in the air didn't diminish. Instead, it intensified, burning the insides of her nostrils with each breath. She tried to reach the emergency stairs. The red door was right there, its horizontal metal bar reflecting the dim light, but when she pushed, it didn't budge. Amanda bumped it with her shoulder, pulled, pushed again. Nothing. On the other side, absolute silence, as if the rest of the hospital had disappeared. She turned, gasping, and the hallway was empty. No shadows, no figures, just the lights flickering slowly from one end to the other, then steadying themselves. She backed up against the wall, trying to steady her breathing, but then she realized she wasn't alone. In the corner of her peripheral vision, the same denser darkness began to form, clinging to the baseboard, rising to hip height and taking the shape of a torso, shoulders, and head. This time, it didn't move slowly. It came in a rush, like a reflection of liquid glass spilling forward. Amanda darted back down the hallway, past the closed doors, feeling a deep shiver run down her spine, as if cold hands were touching each vertebra as she passed. She turned the corner and saw the nurses' station. It was her chance to pick up the landline and call for help, but as she approached, she noticed the phone was off the hook, the cord dangling to the floor. Cut. A creaking sound behind her made her turn, and the shadow was there, but not as before. Now, not pressed against the wall but on the floor, advancing like a puddle spreading too quickly, surrounding her feet. Amanda jumped back, nearly falling, and the shadow retreated a few inches, as if testing the limits of her reaction. In desperation, she ran to the service elevator. He pressed the button repeatedly, hearing the ancient motor start, descending from another floor. The numbers changed slowly, one at a time, irritatingly slow. Meanwhile, the light bulb in the hallway where he was standing exploded, sending shrapnel clanging to the floor. Amanda flinched and felt that cold rush running up her legs again. When the elevator finally arrived, the door opened with a metallic clang, revealing a dark and too empty space. No reflection, no glow from the interior panel, as if the cabin were made of absence. Amanda took a step inside, but something inside her screamed that she shouldn't. At that very moment, the door began to slowly close on its own, and she retreated into the hallway. The interior panel suddenly lit up, and for a brief moment before the doors closed completely, she saw her own reflection inside. But she wasn't alone. A second silhouette, tall and elongated, stood just behind her in the frame. The elevator departed, the noise receding down the shaft, and Amanda stood still, feeling as if the thing hadn't given up. It was just waiting for the next movement. She doesn't remember exactly when she fell. Maybe it was after tripping on the corner of the hallway, or maybe her body simply shut down to spare her. The fact is, when she regained consciousness, she was lying in the break room, under the warm yellow light of a table lamp. The worn leather chair she sat in smelled familiarly of disinfectant, and a grey blanket covered her legs. A colleague, a morning nurse, entered the room holding a clipboard. "They found you in the hallway, unconscious. Are you okay?" Amanda tried to answer, but her voice faltered. The other woman sat next to her and said that the janitor and a security guard had brought her out around 4 in the morning, and that there was no sign of anyone else around. "You must have fainted. It happens. Sometimes the body needs a break," she said, trying to calm herself. But Amanda knew it wasn't just fainting. When she looked at her left arm, she saw long, thin, parallel marks, like superficial scratches that didn't bleed but burned from the inside out. She pulled up her sleeve to hide it. She pretended to drink the lukewarm tea her colleague offered her, but her gaze was fixed on the classroom door, waiting for something to appear. Later, alone, she decided to go to the surveillance room to review the previous night's cameras. She turned on the system and selected the approximate time she had been found. In the recording, she herself appeared lying on the hallway floor, motionless like a slumped mannequin. But there was something else. On the wall beside her body, a patch of shadow, darker than the surroundings, motionless as if watching her, and for almost 10 minutes the shadow remained there, motionless, until two men entered the frame to carry it away. When they passed the shadow, it simply vanished. It didn't run away. It didn't dissolve. It vanished the instant they touched it. Amanda turned off the monitor and took a deep breath. There was no more doubt. This knew how to wait. Over the following weeks, Amanda chatted quietly with other staff members. The stories were always told in hushed tones, with quick glances to the side, as if even mentioning them might trigger the incident. A nursing technician recounted seeing a figure cross the hallway and enter 308 one morning. But when he checked, the door was locked from the inside. An aide said that in isolation she had heard her name whispered 3 times, and that the third time she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. There were also patient reports. A man hospitalized with a fractured femur claimed to have seen someone sitting in his room's chair during the night, but the chair was empty when the lights were turned on. A psychiatric patient described long arms coming out of the wall, trying to touch her feet while she slept. Some security guards admitted to walking off shift after seeing distortions on the cameras, dark spots that appeared in one frame and disappeared in the next. Coleman, the janitor, revealed that years ago the administration had received an anonymous tip alleging that the hospital is housing something that isn't human and moves when no one is looking. The letter was never investigated. Instead, room 308 was closed, officially due to structural issues. Everyone seemed to agree on one thing: anyone who stared at the isolation wall for too long would swear they saw something move, and if the light blinked 3 times, it was best to get out of there immediately. Amanda requested a transfer. She never returned to St. Helena. However, some nights she still wakes with the feeling that something is in the corner of her room, quiet, waiting for her to notice it. The scratches on her arm have disappeared, but sometimes, in certain lighter marks seem to reappear for a few seconds before disappearing. Room 308 remains locked. New employees don't understand why no one talks about it. Veterans, when questioned, simply change the subject. Some say that on very quiet nights you can hear knocks coming from inside, 3 at a time, spaced out as if someone were gently tapping on the wood. Amanda avoids thinking about what would have happened if she had gotten into the elevator that night. But she can't forget Coleman's warning. If the light bulb blinks 3 times, move away from the wall. She doesn't know if this works everywhere, or if it was a warning that came too late, because deep down there is a doubt that has never left her. What if shadows are not the absence of light, but presences that the human eye only perceives when they decide to be seen? And if so, how many are already looking now? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.